Okay, so for this video, I'm going to talk about endosymbiosis, and we're going to explain this concept. So as you know now, this very plain, simple little cell is a prokaryote cell. Okay? A prokaryote. It has no nuclear membrane around the nucleus. There's no membrane-bound organelles in here. It's very small. Here, on the other hand, with a nucleus and things like mitochondria and Golgi bodies and lots of membranes with attached ribosomes and vesicles and lysosomes and all these things, this clearly is not the same as this. This is a cell that has a nuclear membrane. It has a nucleus. It has lots of membrane-bound organelles. This is a eukaryote. So the question is, how did we go from very simple cells with very little complexity to very complex cells with lots of things, lots of complexity, capable of living in lots of different environments and doing many different jobs? How do we get from here to here? And the theory that I'm going to suggest to you is called the endosymbiotic theory. Endo means inside, and symbiotic means symbiosis is like when things work together. Okay, I'm also going to attempt to answer another question, and for this question you're going to need this handout, and you're going to need to do two things. So the first thing you're going to need to do is if you see this one, see here, you see some things I've colored red and some things are colored green. Okay, so you're going to need to color them. And then the next thing I want you to do is this, because we are going to explain something really cool about mitochondria and chloroplasts. So starting off, I know that everybody by now knows that this, kind of like a jelly bean with all these little fingers on the inside, this is a mitochondria. And you also know that I always color these in red. Okay, so this is a mitochondria, okay, or a mitochondrion because there's only one of them. Okay, that is mitochondrion. And the other thing we know is that this, and it's almost always colored green because it contains chlorophyll and it's got all these kind of membranes on the inside. We know this is a chloroplast. What we don't know about mitochondrion and chloroplasts that I haven't really talked to you much is they are unique in organelles because they have their own unique DNA. Okay? They have DNA. It's not the same as the DNA that you find in a nucleus. Okay? This would be called, the way you write it in shorthand is mDNA, mitochondrial DNA. And this is chloroplast DNA. So the big question is, okay, why do mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA? Okay, So that's also a question. So we're going to attempt to answer two questions. We're going to attempt to answer how do we get from a very simple cell, a prokaryote cell, to a highly complex cell, the eukaryote cell, and why do mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA? Okay? Okay, you will notice, starting up here. Okay, so here is a good suggestion. Whenever you have a picture and there are arrows in it, you follow the arrows. The arrows, it usually shows that something that you're looking at is sequential. That means it's a step-by-step, right? So we're going to follow the arrows. So we're going to start here. And you'll notice when you look at this cell that there is not a whole lot going on in there, right? There's no membrane around the nucleus, around the DNA in this cell, so there is no nucleus. So I know immediately, because the absence of a nucleus and the absence of a nuclear membrane tells me that this is a prokaryote cell. Okay? And then if you look in the next diagram, you can see something weird's going on with the nucleus. It's kind of folding in around the DNA. So here, on this step here, the membrane folds around the DNA. And then lo and behold, in the end one, what do we have here? What is this? There is a cell membrane, a membrane around the nucleum, around the DNA. And that is called a nuclear membrane. And what we have just formed is, right, this whole thing here is now a nucleus. And what we know is that a cell that has a nucleus, that has a nuclear membrane around its DNA, is no longer a eukaryote, a prokaryote cell, is it? It is a eukaryote cell. So, how did we get the first eukaryote cell? We had a prokaryote cell where the membrane folded around the nucleus to form a nuclear membrane, and therefore we had a nucleus, and that was the first prokaryote cell. Okay, so now we know where eukaryote cells came from. So here's my eukaryote cell again, okay? And what I have here, colored in red, is an aerobic bacterium. Okay, all right, so if it is a bacterium, that is a bacteria cell. So this is a prokaryote. And what this bacterium has, because it's a living organism in its own right, it has, right, it has bacterial DNA, okay? And you can see here that what's happening is the membrane of the eukaryote cell is engulfing this aerobic bacterium. And I should say this, aerobic means that you use oxygen, okay? Aerobic means you use oxygen. And we know that when we see something using oxygen, think about reactants and products of respiration and photosynthesis. When you use oxygen, you're doing respiration. So this bacterium was doing respiration. Well, now it's been engulfed into the cell. Which organelle do we know that uses oxygen, does cell respiration? A mitochondria. Okay? So this is a mitochondria now. So now what we have is a eukaryote cell that is capable of doing cell respiration. Okay? So we have definitely got more complex. So let's take it another step further. What we have now is a photosynthetic, meaning it does photosynthesis, bacterium. Okay? A photosynthetic bacterium, which was engulfed by the cell. So now what we have inside the cell is a section of the cell capable of doing photosynthesis. What do we call this? This became a chloroplast. Okay, so we can see by a process of kind of engulfing, where the cell swallows up these large bacteria cells, right? We can see how we got the organelles in. But to answer this question, why do mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA? Well, once upon a time, this was an organism in its own right with its own DNA. This was an organism in its own right with its own DNA. And what we find is that the DNA that is inside mitochondria and inside chloroplasts is way more like bacteria than it is like any other animal DNA. Hope that explains everything.